Hi, everyone. We have a bonus episode for you. It's a conversation that I had with Preethi Herman about digital advocacy. Preethi led the Change.org Foundation, supporting 100 million people in campaigns worldwide. Currently, she's CEO and co-founder of Nguvu Collective, a women-led organization that's impacted more than 200 million lives. We recorded this before the U.S. foreign aid freeze, which we'll address more in the coming episodes. Preethi Herman's advice about advocacy couldn't be more relevant. I hope you enjoy. Your first campaign, Preethi, that you've ever run was when you were entering high school, specifically campaigning your family of all people. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. Well, I didn't know it was a campaign at that time. It was actually just trying to find my voice and trying to make my own choices. I grew up in a very, very conservative family and community. And until I was around 15 years or so, it was really difficult for me to even step out of home without someone accompanying me. I wasn't allowed to. As I was finishing school, my parents would have preferred for me to go to a very religious, conservative college. And I wanted to go to a city called Bangalore. I grew up in a really small town. I wanted to go to the city because I wanted to learn to speak English. I also felt like that city was a little more progressive, and therefore I might be able to spread out my wings a bit. It took me about 18 months of slowly trying to convince my parents. I think I finally managed to convince them by saying that if I speak English, I would be able to then secure a good job, which would bring me a good salary and income. And that was probably the first campaign I can think of that I ran in my life.
So part of your argument was tying it to the economics of the family to give you the independent freedom to be able to carve your own path.
That is a very integral part of any campaign. There needs to be an interest for the other party to give in. And so there needs to be a mutual benefit. And it is about them seeing that part too.
Preethi, a part of the reason we wanted to have you, you were head of Change.org in India when the platform really barely had any users. And you ended up growing their base to 10 million. Can I tell you, anybody having an online product to have 10 million is a phenomenal number. What makes a campaign more likely to work?
The most powerful thing in this world is a good story. And if the story is being told by someone who has been impacted by an issue and therefore wants to create change, it's the most inspiring thing ever. Being able to tell a good story, convert your issue into, and talking about it from your personal experience, a personal story, not any story. Being creative with the tools that you use, constantly engage people who have signed your campaigns so that they're not just coming there to sign, but they want to be part of this journey. So keeping that community engaged, getting them, going back to them with either questions or updates, celebrating milestones with them. And then there is no right moment to go and knock on the door of a decision maker. When you feel like something is gathering momentum, take the guts to just reach out to the decision maker and say, something big is happening. You might want to pay attention to this because this requires your action. So those are some of the top level that I can think of.
So tell me a little bit more. I'm interested in how did you manage to make that stretch and get that first million?
We had to really lean in to understand what is it that people on the ground, people from villages, people from small towns were trying to really change. And so we went really grassroots. And it seemed quite the opposite of what one should do in terms of going big as a digital platform. But, we really went for stories that the media wasn't reporting about. And then we started discovering an entire village that did not have drinking water, just needed one well, but that wasn't being given. An entire community that did not get, as part of the public food program, any food grains for like many months. It's a very easy fix, but hadn't happened. Another place where there was a lot of corruption happening to get your driver's license. And so we started profiling. We worked with people who really wanted to change that. We worked with, citizen journalists who wanted to report on these issues, but we kind of converted those stories into, let's have a call to action. What is the change you want to create? And then they would say, provide the food grains, or provide the salary to the teachers, or ensure that there's a notice about somebody does an inspection on the corruption and bribery. All of those. They were simple asks. And so when we started converting those stories into campaigns and supporting these people who are running these stories and campaigns on the ground by bringing in initially hundreds of signatures, slowly they became thousands of signatures because that really worried the decision makers on the ground. Getting 1,000 people signing on to something in a village meant that there were 1,000 people watching them, and it was very scary. And so suddenly a lot of shifts started happening. The well was built, the salaries to the teachers were paid, the food grains were provided, and these were wins. So we were celebrating and also kind of reinforcing to people that everyone can be a change maker.
Can you give me an example in India of a campaign that really worked and made a transformative difference and changed policy?
I want to talk to you about Subarna. Subarna comes from Calcutta, one of the eastern parts of cities of India. She was, when she was having her baby, was forced into a C-section. She was told, and this was a family doctor, and she was told, you grew up in a well-off family, you don't know how to bear pain, just you need to have a C-section. It was, she truly believed that wasn't required. She wanted natural birth. It took her, after many years of really not being able to process that, she started really researching into the topic and started pulling out data about the status of C-section in India. Now, she found out with public data, with information from the government, that in some states, out of all births, C-section was more than 90%. Just to give you context, the World Health Organization says anything more than 10% stops becoming life-saving. Up to 10% is like a life-saving thing, but anything more than that just has a commercial angle to it or other reasons for it. So if all of these women were going through C-section, which is probably not a good thing either for their health or the baby's health, especially if it's not really necessary, the impact of health on women in this country, and we're talking about a country with 1.3 billion people, and at least half of them being women. So Subarna started a campaign asking the Women and Child Development Minister. She said, this is quite rampant across the country. Can you please ensure all public hospitals put out their C-section rates in the notice board so that people entering the hospital know how many C-sections happen in their hospital and they can choose whether they want to go there or not. It seems like a very simple ask, but it caused so much of an outrage in the country. Like all these health professionals getting so mad at Subarna and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. It became very big, and like suddenly within 2 days, she was being interviewed by all big media houses because it was a big issue. The fact that there was, in some states, up to 98% of deliveries being C-section was really scary. And it started showcasing a lot of the corruption within medical practices, where doctors are given targets, delivery targets to hit every day. It was clearly commercial. It took her a few months. She managed to, at one point, when the ministry said, we have no proof, we only have some data, but we have no proof that women are being forced. She had, I think, about 300,000 people signing her petition. So she sent a note to all of them to say, if you have a personal experience, would you mind sharing that with me? She got 150,000 women writing back to her. In the petition itself, within the comment section, their own stories of forced C-section, which they hadn't approved or wanted. She took that, went to the ministry, and I think within a few weeks, the ministry had issued an order that said that all public hospitals will now need to put out information about their C-section rates and leave the power of choosing, and now slowly some private hospitals too, and the power of choosing to be there would be a woman's and not the hospital's.
So, Preethi, recently you launched the Nguvu Collective. It's a social impact enterprise that empowers women leaders and change makers in Africa and Asia. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Nguvu Collective truly believes that more women should be in positions of social, political, economic power. Because when there are more women in positions of leadership, we've seen amazing things happen to the world. But we need to create the right environment to support them, to shift their brand, and for them to become really strong brands in themselves as leaders. And so that's actually what Nguvu Collective is setting out to do. We are trying to build a very big core group of women who will become the future strong leaders in all of these countries across the world.
If you were to set up sort of guidelines for people on creating women's groups, what would you tell them?
Well, women all have similar shared experiences of discrimination. Like, you put any kind of a woman together, there will be at least one thing that they have experienced that is similar across race, caste, class, all of that. So shared experiences and powering through those shared experiences. So connection, essentially, but connection emotionally, connection spiritually, and then also being a resource for each other. So a lot of giving and holding space for each other. Those are very critical elements in all of this. The logic and the money should follow. The main thing is connection, because if you have connection, they'll figure out the rest. I always thought I was probably the only person who felt so isolated in her journey. I felt very alone, be it in my leadership or in my journey as a woman changemaker. And so, years later, when we found out that a big chunk of our users on the platform were men, I actually started speaking to a lot of our women users, especially the ones who had started campaigns, engaging them and asking them, when you were running your campaign, what was the most difficult thing for you? What is it that if you were to do again, you would want support on? And almost unanimously, about 25 of them said, I felt alone. And that was the most difficult part. It was an aha moment for me, because I realized we're all isolated and lonely in our own worlds. We're all lonely together at the same time. And how can we break through that? And so it's from there that we started this program called She Creates Change. The idea was, what if we brought a group of women, 25 to 30 of them at one time, and then went through this process of change making, where they thought about change making not in isolation as individuals, but as a group. What if they saw themselves as members of an ecosystem who played different roles at different points of time?
Preethi, you came from the backwaters of India, made it to a much bigger city in Bangalore, and created massive change on a global scale. What do you say to women and girls who are listening today that want to be part of social change, but might not see the path forward or think that they have it in them? What's your advice?
Listen to your inner voice. Believe in that voice, whatever it's telling you. If it says you can go scale that mountain, do it. Because you can. And then you'll realize you can do much more than that. And so be crazy. It's okay. It doesn't matter as long as you're proud of yourself. Just go do it.
Preethi Herman with the Nguvu Collective. I have been so inspired after this podcast. I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing and for joining us and sharing your story.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that does it for today's show. The Hidden Economics of Remarkable Women is hosted by me, Reena Ninan. Laura Rossbrow-Tellem is our senior producer. Rob Sachs, our managing director. The Hidden Economics of Remarkable Women is a production of Foreign Policy and is supported by the Gates Foundation and the Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs at Northwestern University. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in your feed in 2 weeks.